This is Michael, a poor man whose wife abandoned him and their twin boys when life got tough. But what she didn't know was that the very children she left behind would one day rise to unimaginable heights. Stay with us, because what happens next is a story of betrayal, struggle, and unexpected success. And if you're just tuning in, don't forget to like and subscribe for more life-changing stories. Michael was a simple man who worked tirelessly at a small factory. Every morning, he left before sunrise and returned late at night, hands blistered, clothes soaked in sweat, and pockets nearly empty. His only comfort in life was his wife, Clara, and their twin boys, Daniel and David. But Clara was growing restless. Poverty was something she had never learned to live with. She watched her friends marry wealthy men, live in big houses, and wear expensive clothes. Every day, she compared her life to theirs, and her bitterness grew. One evening, Michael returned home to find Clara packing a small suitcase. He froze at the doorway, his heart pounding. "Clara, what are you doing?" he asked quietly, afraid of the answer. Her face was cold, her hands steady as she zipped up the bag. "I can't do this anymore, Michael. I'm tired of living in misery. You promised me a good life, but look at us, we can barely feed ourselves. I refuse to waste the rest of my life struggling with you." Michael dropped his bag to the floor, his voice breaking. "Clara, please, don't say this. Things will get better. I just need more time. I'm working so hard for you, for the boys. They need their mother." Clara's eyes flashed with irritation. "They'll survive with you." "I deserve better. I want more than this poverty. I won't stay and rot in this place." Michael's hands trembled as he reached for her arm, but she pulled away. "Clara, we vowed to face life together. Through thick and thin. Don't do this." She shook her head, lifting her suitcase. "I'm sorry, Michael, but I can't live like this anymore." And with that, she walked out of the door, leaving her husband and their two sons behind. Michael stood frozen, his body numb, his mind refusing to accept what had just happened. The cries of his sons snapped him back to reality. Daniel tugged at his shirt, while David reached out for him with tear-filled eyes. Slowly, Michael knelt beside them. His tears streamed freely as he pulled them close. "Your mother is gone," he whispered, his voice trembling, "but I will never abandon you. I will raise you with everything I have. I will be both father and mother to you. I promise." That night, Michael sat in the small room, the boys curled up against his chest. His heart was shattered, but deep inside him, a new fire had been lit. He knew life would only get harder from this moment on, but he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would fight for his sons. He would give them the life their mother thought they would never have. And so began the painful journey of a single father. Life after Clara's departure was nothing short of a nightmare for Michael. Raising twin boys alone with almost nothing in his pockets felt like carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Every morning he left before sunrise for the factory, and every evening he returned home to two hungry children waiting for him with tear-stained faces. The little money he earned was barely enough for food. Many nights, Michael went to bed hungry just so his sons could eat. He would quietly watch Daniel and David chewing on small pieces of bread, pretending to be full, even when his own stomach groaned in pain. Neighbors often gossiped about him. Some pitied him, others mocked. "That's the man whose wife abandoned him," they whispered. "Poor fellow, he'll never survive with those twins." But Michael refused to bow to shame. Each time he looked into the innocent eyes of his boys, he found strength. One rainy evening, after a long and exhausting day at work, Michael returned to find the boys crying uncontrollably. Their thin shirts were soaked through from a leaking roof, and the small kerosene lamp had gone out. The room smelled of dampness, and the boys clung to him, shivering. He pulled them close, tears threatening to fall, but he forced himself to smile. "Don't cry, my sons. As long as I live, you'll never be alone. One day you'll look back at this and see how far we've come." That night he stayed awake, holding them tight against his chest, whispering prayers into the darkness. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Michael learned how to multitask, working long shifts at the factory during the day and taking small handyman jobs at night. He washed clothes for neighbors, repaired broken chairs, and carried heavy loads in the marketplace just to earn extra coins. Sometimes he would walk home barefoot so he could save money to buy shoes for the boys. Other times he stitched his torn shirt for the 10th time instead of buying a new one so Daniel and David could have new school uniforms. Despite the hardship, Michael made education a priority. "Books will take you where I couldn't go," he often told his sons. "Education is the key that will open doors poverty has shut on us." Every morning he walked them to the small community school, holding their tiny hands with pride. He couldn't afford all the textbooks, but he encouraged them to borrow and learn from others. Daniel and David, though still very young, could sense the weight their father carried. They admired his sacrifices and, even as children, promised each other they would make him proud. But not everyone appreciated Michael's determination. One afternoon while paying school fees late, the headmaster sneered, "Michael, why don't you just accept that you can't afford to raise these boys? Poverty will swallow you whole. Maybe if you give them up, someone better could take care of them." Michael clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "No," he said firmly. "They are my blood. My sons. No one will ever raise them but me." He left that office with a heavy heart, but his resolve grew stronger. Poverty may have stripped him of many things, but it would not take his dignity as a father. One particular evening, after another grueling day, Michael collapsed on his small wooden bed. His body was weak, his palms blistered, and his breath heavy. Daniel, noticing his father's struggle, brought him a glass of water. "Daddy," the boy said softly, "one day David and I will become rich. We will build you a big house, and you'll never have to suffer again." Michael's eyes filled with tears as he pulled both boys close. "I don't need riches," he whispered. "Seeing you two grow into good men will be the greatest reward of my life. But if you do succeed, never forget where you came from, and never forget that love and kindness are more valuable than gold." The boys nodded, their little hearts touched by their father's words. Michael didn't know it then, but those long nights of hunger, those countless sacrifices, and that relentless faith were slowly shaping his sons into the great men they would one day become. What looked like a curse, their mother's abandonment, was becoming the very fuel that would drive them toward unimaginable success. Years passed, and Daniel and David slowly grew from fragile boys into determined young men. Though life was still difficult, the foundation their father had laid in them was beginning to show. Michael's sacrifices had not been in vain. At school, the twins stood out, not because they had the nicest clothes or the newest shoes, but because of their sharp minds and burning determination. Teachers quickly noticed that Daniel had a gift for mathematics, while David excelled in reading, writing, and public speaking. One afternoon, after a mathematics competition, Daniel stood in front of the school with a certificate clutched in his tiny hands. His smile was wide, his eyes shining with pride. The headmaster, who once doubted Michael, had no choice but to announce, "This young boy has not only topped our school, but outperformed students across the district." The crowd cheered, and Michael, standing at the back, could not hold back his tears. His chest swelled with pride as Daniel ran to him, certificate in hand. "Daddy, I did it!" Daniel shouted. Michael lifted him high into the air, despite his aching arms. "Yes, my son, you did it. And this is just the beginning. I told you both, books will take you farther than poverty ever could." Meanwhile, David began developing a natural talent for leadership. While Daniel shined in academics, David was the one who could organize his classmates, solve conflicts, and speak with courage even when others trembled. Teachers often called him the little politician, though Michael always reminded him, "Use your voice for good, my son. Speak for those who cannot." At home, life was still full of challenges. Food was scarce, and the roof continued to leak whenever it rained. But inside that little home, there was something stronger than comfort. There was love. Every evening, Michael would sit with his sons around the small wooden table, their books spread before them. Though he could barely understand the equations or the essays, he listened intently, encouraging them with nods and smiles. "Teach me what you've learned today," he would often say. And the boys, eager to impress him, would take turns explaining their lessons. It was in those quiet moments that the bond between father and sons grew unbreakable. But the world wasn't always kind. One Saturday, Clara returned. She had remarried a wealthier man, but After her second marriage failed, she came back to the village wearing fancy clothes and a bitter smile. Seeing her twins grown and thriving without her shocked her. "Michael," she said sharply, "don't you think it's time I took the boys with me? I can give them a better life now." "Look at you, you're still poor." Michael's fists tightened at his sides. He looked her straight in the eyes. "You left them when they needed you most. You abandoned your family without a second thought. Now you want to take them because you think money makes you a better parent? No, Clara. These boys are mine. They are not a burden I carried alone for you to reap the reward." Clara sneered, her pride wounded. "You'll regret this, Michael. These boys deserve more than you can ever give." But Daniel and David, standing nearby, had already made their choice. "We're staying with Daddy," David said firmly. Daniel nodded in agreement. For the first time, Clara's confident face faltered. Without another word, she turned and walked away once more. Michael pulled his sons close, his heart breaking, yet swelling with pride. "Thank you," he whispered. "You've just given me the strength to keep fighting." As the years continued, Daniel and David's names began to spread beyond the walls of their small community. They earned scholarships, entered competitions, and even caught the attention of local newspapers. Michael, though still poor, began to see glimpses of the future he had dreamed for his sons. A future where the seeds he planted through hunger, through tears, through endless sacrifice, were now beginning to sprout. Little did he know those seeds would grow into towering trees, strong enough to shake the very foundations of the world. Time moved quickly, and before Michael realized it, his boys were no longer children. Daniel and David had grown tall, sharp, and confident, young men with ambition burning in their eyes. Despite their humble beginnings, their brilliance opened doors that poverty could never close. Daniel's talent in mathematics earned him a scholarship to one of the best universities in the country. David, with his gift of words and leadership, secured his own scholarship to study business and communications. The day they left home for the city, Michael stood by the rusty old bus that would take them away. He held their bags, his hands trembling as he passed them over. "My sons," he said, his voice breaking, "you are stepping into a bigger world now. Never forget who you are, and never forget the struggles that brought you here. Poverty may be our past, but it is not your future." The boys hugged him tightly, promising, "Daddy, we will make you proud. One day you won't struggle again. We swear it." Michael smiled through his tears. "I don't need riches. I just need to see you succeed. That will be my wealth." The bus drove off, leaving him behind with a mixture of sadness and pride. Though his little home suddenly felt emptier, his heart was full of hope. Life in the city was not easy for the twins. They were constantly reminded that they came from nothing. Wealthy classmates mocked their cheap clothes and rural accents. But instead of shrinking in shame, Daniel and David used the insults as fuel. Daniel spent sleepless nights buried in books, tackling problems even his professors struggled to solve. Soon his name became known across campus as the genius from nowhere. David, on the other hand, began organizing students, leading debates, and speaking at events. People were drawn to his charisma, his courage, and his unshakable belief that even the poor could rise. One evening after a seminar, a wealthy investor approached David. "Young man," he said, "your words moved me. You speak like a leader, not a student. Have you ever considered starting something of your own?" David smiled. "Not yet, sir. But my brother and I, we have big dreams," the investor chuckled. "Dreams are good, but when you're ready, come find me. I believe you'll do great things." Back in the village, Michael worked tirelessly, even as age caught up with him. His neighbors whispered that his sons would forget him once they tasted success in the city, but Michael never believed it. Every letter he received from them was filled with gratitude and love. Then came the day he had been waiting for. Daniel returned home during a school break, holding an envelope. "Daddy," he said, handing it over, "this is for you." Michael opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter confirming that Daniel had been selected to represent his university in an international competition abroad, with all expenses paid. Tears blurred his vision. "My son, the world will now see what I've always known, that you are destined for greatness." David added with a grin, "And Daddy, this is just the beginning. We're not stopping here." Michael's heart swelled with pride. The seeds he had planted were no longer just sprouting, they were beginning to bloom. But success didn't come without struggles. Daniel faced setbacks when his research was stolen by a jealous classmate. David was betrayed by people who pretended to be friends. Yet, through every storm, they leaned on each other, remembering the lessons of their father. Never give up. Never forget where you came from. Together, they began dreaming bigger. Not just scholarships, not just competitions. They wanted to build something that would outlive them, something that would change lives just as their father's sacrifices had changed theirs. And so, without knowing it, the journey of two future billionaires had truly begun. Daniel and David had tasted small victories, but they knew true success would not come from just excelling in school. They wanted more. They wanted to create something of their own. It was during a late-night conversation in their cramped student apartment that the idea was born. "Daniel," David said, pacing the room, "we can't just depend on scholarships forever. We need to start something, something that can grow." Daniel looked up from his notes. "Like what?" "We don't even have money to pay next month's rent." David leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with determination. "That's exactly why we must try. Remember what Dad said? Poverty is not our destiny. If we fail, fine, we fail. But if we succeed, we can change everything." After hours of brainstorming, they settled on an idea, a small tech startup that would create affordable digital solutions for small businesses. Daniel's programming skills and David's gift for persuasion made them a perfect team. To raise money, they took odd jobs. Daniel tutored students in mathematics. David worked as a waiter in a small cafe. Every coin they earned, they saved. Eventually, they scraped together just enough to buy a second-hand laptop and register their company. They named it Twintech Solutions. At first, it seemed promising. David went from shop to shop, convincing local businesses to try their software. Daniel worked sleepless nights coding, fixing bugs, and improving features. They poured their hearts into it, but reality struck hard. Their clients, mostly small shop owners, struggled to pay. Many backed out after a few months. The twins were left with debts and a reputation of being two broke boys chasing big dreams. One evening, Daniel sat with his head in his hands. "David, maybe we should quit. Maybe people are right. We aim too high. We should just focus on finishing school." David's jaw tightened. "Quit? After everything we've been through?" "No, Daniel. We are not giving up. We will learn from this. If Twintech fails, fine, but something else will rise from its ashes." Months passed. The brothers regrouped, this time thinking bigger. They studied market trends, attended free seminars, and learned from every mistake. They realized that instead of targeting struggling small shops, they needed to solve bigger problems for larger clients. Their persistence caught the eye of a professor who admired their determination. One day, he called them into his office. "I've been watching you two," the professor said. "You remind me of myself when I was your age, hungry, determined, unstoppable. I have a friend who runs a mid-sized company. He's been looking for affordable digital solutions. I'll give you a chance to pitch to him." The twins exchanged stunned glances. This was it, their breakthrough moment. They spent sleepless nights preparing for the meeting. Daniel fine-tuned the software while David polished his pitch. On the day of the presentation, they walked into the office in their best thrifted suits, nervous but determined. The CEO listened carefully as David spoke, his voice calm but powerful. Daniel demonstrated the product, explaining every feature. When they finished, the CEO leaned back in his chair. "You two are young, very young, but I like your spirit. I'll give you a chance. Deliver and we'll talk contracts." That night, the twins could barely contain their excitement. It wasn't a full victory yet, but it was the spark they needed. From that single opportunity, doors slowly began to open. Twintech was no longer just a failed student project. It was becoming the foundation of something much greater. Still, the road ahead was long. For every small win, there were bigger setbacks. But Michael's words echoed in their hearts every time they wanted to give up. "My sons, poverty may be our past, but it is not your future." And with that, the twins pressed forward toward the destiny that would one day shock even the mother who had abandoned them. Twintech Solutions had started as a dream in a cramped apartment, but now it was catching fire. After securing their first mid-sized client, Daniel and David proved themselves by delivering beyond expectations. The software was smooth, affordable, and reliable. Word spread quickly. Within a year, they had contracts with several companies. Within 2, they were no longer just the poor twins from the slums. They were recognized as young innovators with a bright future. Money began to flow. Slowly at first, enough to pay off debts and live decently. But soon it became more than enough. They moved into a modest but beautiful home, bought better clothes, and even opened an office with a small team. Michael, their father, watched it all unfold with tears in his eyes. His sons, whom he once struggled to feed, were now feeding others by creating jobs. At night, he often whispered prayers of gratitude. But success brought attention, not just from the business world, but from people from their past. One evening, Daniel and David returned home to find a woman waiting at their gate. She looked worn down by life, her clothes old, but her eyes sharp with recognition. It was Clara, their mother. Michael froze when he saw her. His hands trembled, and for a moment his mind went back to that painful night years ago when she walked out with her suitcase, leaving him and the boys behind. "Michael," she said softly, tears in her eyes. "It's me." Michael's face hardened. "I know who you are. What do you want?" The twins, now grown men, stepped forward. Daniel's voice was calm but laced with steel. "Why are you here?" Clara clasped her hands together. "I made mistakes. I was foolish. I thought wealth and comfort mattered more than family. I left because I was weak. But when I heard what you've become, my heart couldn't let me stay away. I came to ask for forgiveness and to be part of your lives again." David's fists clenched. The memory of their childhood hunger, the nights they cried themselves to sleep without a mother's touch, came flooding back. "Part of our lives, now that we've made it? Where were you when Dad broke his back for us? Where were you when we starved?" Tears rolled down Clara's cheeks. "I regret everything. Please give me a second chance. I am still your mother." Michael turned his face away, unable to look at her. The wound she had left in his heart was still raw, even after all these years. Daniel and David exchanged glances. One part of them wanted to shut the door forever. Another part, buried deep, remembered that this woman had once held them as babies. The air grew heavy with silence. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice firm. "We'll think about it. But don't expect us to forget overnight. You abandoned us when we needed you most. Forgiveness is not something you can buy with tears." Clara nodded slowly, realizing the mountain she had to climb. Meanwhile, the twins' company was exploding in growth. Investors were lining up, magazines were writing about them, and their humble beginnings became the core of their inspirational story. From the slums to the boardroom, from hunger to global recognition, Daniel and David were on their way to becoming billionaires. But behind all the success, one question lingered like a shadow. Would they ever truly accept their mother back into their lives? And as Clara silently wept that night outside their gate, Michael stood at the window watching her. His heart was torn between hatred and pity. He whispered to himself, "God, show my sons the right path." Not every decision is about money. Some are about healing. The storm was not over. In fact, it was only beginning. The day of reckoning came sooner than anyone expected. Daniel and David had just been announced on the cover of Forbes magazine as two of the youngest billionaires in the world. The feature told their journey from abandoned children to empire builders, and their story spread like wildfire across TV, radio, and social media. As the news broke, a figure from the shadows stirred. Clara. She sat in her small rented apartment, staring at the glossy magazine with their faces on the cover. Her heart twisted. The boys she had left behind were now powerful men, men who had succeeded without her. That night, Clara made a decision. She would go to Thaven. The twins were being honored at a gala in Lagos, celebrating the 10th anniversary of Twintech Solutions. The hall was filled with the nation's elite, politicians, business magnates, celebrities, and journalists. Michael sat in the front row, dressed in a neat suit, his proud smile never leaving his face. When Daniel and David walked onto the stage, the audience erupted with applause. Their presence commanded attention. two tall, confident men who had built an empire from the ashes of abandonment. As they took the award, Daniel leaned into the microphone. His voice was steady, carrying a weight that silenced the hall. Tonight, we stand here not only as entrepreneurs, but as proof that pain can birth purpose. Our story began with loss, betrayal, and hardship. But it is also a story of love, because one man, our father, never gave up on us. The crowd roared with approval, some standing to clap for Michael, who bowed his head, tears glistening. But as the applause died down, movement stirred at the back of the hall. Clara stood trembling, as if invisible hands pushed her forward. Her voice cracked as she cried out, "Daniel, David, my sons." The entire hall turned. Whispers filled the air. Cameras zoomed in. The woman who had abandoned them was now standing before the world, begging to be acknowledged. The twins froze. Michael clenched his fist, but he said nothing. The decision was theirs. Daniel's jaw tightened. Memories of hunger, nights of tears, and watching their father suffer flashed before his eyes. Still, he stepped toward the microphone. "Mother, guess them," he said, his tone controlled but heavy. "For years, we asked ourselves, why you left us when life was hardest, why we weren't enough for you to stay. We searched for answers, but none came. And now you return after we have built everything from nothing." Clara sobbed openly. "I was foolish. I was weak. Please, just give me a second chance." The hall fell silent. Everyone waited for the twins' response. David spoke next, his voice deeper, sharper. "We spent years carrying anger toward you. But we have learned something. Anger is a prison. We cannot live chained to what you did. So tonight, we say this: we forgive you." The audience gasped. Clara's face lit with hope until Daniel continued. "But forgiveness is not an invitation. Forgiveness means we release the pain you caused us. But it does not mean you can return to our lives as if nothing happened. That door closed the day you walked out. We have healed, but without you." Clara's knees buckled. She fell into her seat, weeping bitterly. She had received forgiveness, but not restoration. The crowd erupted in applause, not just for the twins' success, but for their wisdom. They had chosen strength without cruelty, mercy without vulnerability. Michael rose from his seat, his chest swelling with pride. His boys had become men, not just wealthy, but wise. As the twins walked off stage, arm in arm with their father, Daniel whispered to David, "We let her go without hate. That's enough." And so, their story ended not in bitterness, but in balance. They had risen above pain, turned it into power, and proven that true strength is knowing when to forgive and when to walk away. So, my dear viewers, life will test us with betrayal, abandonment, and heartbreak. But the true measure of strength is not in how much wealth we gather, but in how we rise above pain without letting it poison our future. Daniel and David forgave their mother, not because she deserved it, but because they deserved peace. Forgiveness freed their hearts, but wisdom taught them to set boundaries. The lesson is simple: forgive to heal, but never confuse forgiveness with allowing someone to hurt you again. True success is not only in riches, it's in knowing when to let go, when to move on, and when to protect the life you've built. And that, dear friends, is the story of a father's sacrifice, a mother's regret, and two boys who turned pain into power. Remember, success is the sweetest revenge, but forgiveness is the greatest freedom. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next life-changing tale.